Hello, everyone watching at home. Welcome to Adelaide Eternal. We're bringing you another one of our fireside chats, is what it originally started off as. In reality, they're just brewing chats. So we have Drew Carter and Dan Abraham here, ready to for me to pick your brains, and likewise as well. I think the discussion topic for today is going to be all about what we can do in this no RL bonus point space.
That's good.
I'm excited. I think it's a really wonderful time to be in playing Highlander.
Yeah. I mean, I also think, like I was saying earlier before we started, that any kind of points change or like sort of rule changes, it makes for a really a fruitful time for thinking about design. For me, it's like I really get most out of from Magic in terms of design, and so changes to rules, changes to design parameters. Like that's the fun bit. So yeah, very excited to talk to you guys about what you're thinking.
Yeah, so there'd be like, can we adapt existing decks or can we make new decks that weren't previously possible? They're kind of two different avenues.
Yeah, exactly. Well, why don't we talk about the boring thing there? I mean, you've got one of those is really exciting. One of them is really boring. The boring one is adapting an existing deck. So why don't I'll just flash up on the screen an example of Rug Life.
It's exciting if you're passionate about the deck.
Yeah, exactly right. So let's look at an unpowered version of Rug Life, because obviously you can't play power if you're trying to do no reserve list. So if you're looking at unpowered, this is just one that I've just been throwing together. So it's 61 cards. But you've got your usual suspects for all of your threats. Nothing changes here. You've got your usual suspects with some selection and removal. And then you've got some of these things that fuel the delve threats like Murktide, Regent, and Hooting Mandrills. And obviously a soft permission to allow you to just kind of force through various threats and turn your thing sideways. Nothing really changes there. The only thing that's different is, well, your 3 dual lands. And this is really a discussion point on do you if you don't own these dual lands, there's obviously no real choice there. You're going to go, well, I'm going to avail myself of this no reserve list bonus point. So I will play 3 shock lands. As you'll see, my lists with Rug Life and probably most of my lists have a very low number of shock lands in general. So it's a pretty easy conversion to add in the 2 other shock lands and then turn this into the red-blue Horizon land, where you get to draw a card in the late game.
Fiery Islet.
Yeah, Fiery Islet, that's the one. So in doing that, what do you gain? What do you lose? Well, you don't really care that much about your life total. So taking an additional couple of points more damage every game when you are almost always the aggressor on Rug Life is not a cost. The main cost really is looking at things like consistency. So can you consistently play your turn 1 green threat and then the following turn play a blue-red threat into a red-red colorless threat or something like that? And is that an island so that you can return it with days? So there are these small kind of consistency things, but when you're looking at shock lands and maybe a Fiery Islet, it's not a dramatic difference. The big question is, if you were able to do that and you owned the dual lands, would you forego those 3 dual lands and start the game on 6 life higher on average, not on average, but in some games? And what would you gain with that additional point? That's a pretty, for me, when I'm building Rug Life, it's not really a very interesting question, because Rug Life generally doesn't care about its points. From its very inception, Rug Life honestly didn't care about its 7 points, so played Ancestral Recall and Time Walk, because it's like, Thug Life, chuck these 2 pointed cards in. The majority of the games are turn Goblin Guide sideways and then play a Tarmogoyf and daze something and win. So what you actually gain with that additional point is a bit debatable. So this is not a very interesting design space, which is why I wanted to start it off, get the boring question out of the way.
I think it's fascinating.
I think so too.
Really? Oh, I find it so boring.
When you say, well, the points don't matter, so meh.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty much the opposite of how people normally think about deck building. Which is fascinating. Yeah.
I also think it's like, so you go, Drew.
No, you go, Dan.
I was going to say, like, I also think it's kind of fascinating because, like, one of the better decks in the format at the moment, I think, is the mono red deck. And it's a natural predator. Like aggro, like genuine aggro is a natural predator of tempo strategies, because they can get under their tempo advantages. And so the idea of starting on 4 or like less life is like genuinely relevant for rug life there. And what I started to think about was like, what's the extent to which like these kind of tempo decks can sport more basics, and whether or not you can build a functional mana base with few lands with more basics. And I just know that like Sarv, you're generally a more aggressive mana based builder than me. I'm extremely conservative. Like I want to have 16 sources of all my primary colors and 14 of my secondary colors when I'm building 4 colors, for example. But I know that you've built with lower quantities of that, and I'd be interested in your thoughts about whether or not it can sustain more basics rather than just pump heaps of shock lands into these kinds of lists.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And yeah, I build this with like, I walk the knife edge with things like rug life. You're thinking, okay, best case scenario, you're always the aggressor. And you've pointed out the exact thing where you turn up and you're playing against Burn and you're like, oh, but I'm the aggressor. I'm meant to be the aggressor. And suddenly that dynamic is switched, and it can become a really, really hard game, especially if these are all shock lands starting on a lower life total. You can definitely do things like build 2 basic islands here so that you increase your gush and daze likelihoods, especially if this is a fiery islet. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. When I started with rug life, I ended up with island, forest, no mountain. And I played that for a while until I just found that the single island was enough, and I just didn't need to draw 2 islands ever. So yeah, I think there's definitely exploration to be had in that space. Where you want that, 8th point, I would say that my builds tend to be as focused on your primary game plan as possible, but there is an argument to playing something like Uro. So it's possible that if I were to be sleeving this up and I went down the path that you're saying, maybe more basics, maybe some shock lands, a bit more stable, trying to keep a stable mana base as possible, that can still play your threats, but then you have Uro in the board and you bring that in for the specific matchups you need it. That could be really amazing. I'm an advocate of putting a 7th, the last point, into the board, and I know lots of people don't like that.
Yeah, I just put Lucha in the board anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point.
Yeah. But I think you're right. There's also like space for Oko there and stuff like that. Like if you look at your list, like it's a very it's the the Boros version of rug life. It's like the hyper aggressive sort of version, but there are more controlling versions that could play additional lands, and to have things like Oko and Euro in there, which are slower.
Exactly.
Threats. Yeah.
I think the life gain on Euro is an interesting point to try and negate the life loss from the shocks. Like I think because we've already just implicitly identified like 2 ways of like keeping your 3 colors in a bonus point list where you use shocks, and that's less relevant if you're the aggressor. So if you're aggressive 3 colors, you can still enact your game plan, not get too punished by the changed mana base. Or maybe if you like load up on life gain to offset that life loss, that can enable you to retain your 3 color mana base with the no reserve list bonus point.
Yeah, this is kind of what you're talking about, where you have a higher density of threats that last, as opposed to rug life where it's like Goblin Guide. They're threats that don't last, so that you gain tempo, and then you can play this big rug type of approach, Rug Lord, where you have threats that these are like have staying power, you know, threats that kind of are, you know, one entire engine around which the game starts to warp itself. And you know, Uro is one of those. This is probably one of those types of decks that you're thinking about, because here we could add another bonus point here and we'd be losing Tiger, Tropical Island, and Volcanic Island, and replacing them with shocks. As you can see in my list, like I don't even play shocks in this type of list because I want as many basics as possible. You could play the 3 shocks there in that place and it would change very little. It'd all be about what is that 8th point, you know, when you get a bonus point, what does that bonus point give you? And sometimes it's, you know, force of will or mana drain. Sometimes it's something that like inherently enacts your game plan, works to do something that you couldn't otherwise do. And sometimes it's something like throwing in a wasteland for additional value, or maybe Caracas, where you end up just being able to dominate board states that otherwise could not be won any other way, you know, when they've got the Tasiga out and they keep bouncing the Tasiga.
Why do you want the more basics in the more controlling version?
Because then I can really leverage moons. You know, this is a sideboard card that will, you know, very easily get replaced by many other things. You know, the Force of Vigors and so on. It's a largely replaceable card. Like, you know, Hercule's Recall can play the same kind of role. But you get things like Blood Moon, Match to the Moon, back to basics.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess that's probably the less interesting side of things.
I'll just say that metagame implication of that, of some of our thoughts, is interesting. Like if people start playing bonus point more, so you get more aggressive postures or more life gain tools to offset the use of shocks, that could make for quite an interesting dynamic in the metagame where you've got aggression and life gain kind of butting up against each other, or people actually thinking more about how they're going to deal with the aggro mirror, which sometimes people don't really fully sideboard for. I think that's interesting.
I mean, I think that people should definitely, like when I see people like moving to 3 shocks, I think, oh, I want to get more aggressive, right? And so people should be testing for that, I think, when they're developing these kinds of lists. I mean, I think the other interesting thing you've identified there, Sarv, is like, you know, like you've got a rug list, but, you know, like straight up blue-red tempo has been like tearing it up in Legacy. It's like 20% of the metagame at the moment. And there's lots of really good blue-red threats and ways to generate tempo, and lots of great like low-pointed options that are blue in the points list that are not in the reserve list. And so I think there's definitely on Moxfield, there are already people who are messing around with like blue-red tempo versions of lists that they can main deck their moons. They can, you know, they've got Murktides and Ledger Shredders and Snapcaster Mages, Force of Will. Like there's great cards already just in those 2 colors, and just trimming on a volcanic island is not such a big cost. Probably the big cost is in terms of the like you lose Tarmogoyf, like some of those really good chunky threats is where you start to lose out. And so the testing then is to be done around, I think, whether or not it's worth the extra point to play just the 2-color edition, or whether or not you really get something more from those beefier kind of green threats and the sideboard options that green offers.
Or whether you can have your cake and eat it too and play the rug bonus point.
Yeah. That's right. I think that's the tempo kind of like testing, I think, to be done is around those sorts of ways of thinking. I mean, when I first saw the rule change, my mind immediately went to just playing blue-red, right? It supports Price of Progress really well. You can still play Strip Mine Wasteland. Like, it's just feeling like a really, like potentially a good time to be on, some kind of blue-red deck.
I agree with that. However, if more bonus point decks start emerging and they're 2 colors, the Price of Progress maybe, and the moons get worse.
It's beautiful balancing act, isn't it? It's so interesting to see these things self-regulate, because we've had a very long season, maybe an epoch even, of stews, you know, just absolute piles of just good cards, you know, these mid-range
I think we're amongst the worst offenders. No.
Greed is good, right? So
Yeah,
like
that's right. Yeah.
greed creep began, and then it just kept going. And there was no effective way to point greed creep without pointing a slew of cards, or the opposite, which is accepting that power level has increased and progressively pointing things. But this rule might change the landscape of the format such that, as you said, people are starting to sleeve up the blue red of yesteryear, and the only reason that I was playing Rug Life in comparison to the blue red decks of its time was because blue red just had terrible threats. It was just bad, and you're trying to hope that you get there, and you just can't quite. If you can't quite get there, you're guaranteed to lose. But when you've got a Tarmogoyf, it's very different. Nowadays you've got things like magmatic channeler and all these other kind of things that are they can play the Tarmogoyf role. So maybe blue red is an excellent policeman to have in the format, where
there was no Murktide region when you were doing Rug Life initially, right? Like this.
Sorry?
There was no Murktide when you were doing
no,
Rug Life initially.
there were no threats like this. Anyone wants to read
yeah.
my article and go look at the circa 2018 deck list for Rug Life, and you'll go, you played these cards and it was good. That's how things changed from 2019 onwards. 2018, yeah. I was like, oh, I'm lucky to have Goblin Guide. If only I could have 4 of these.
Yeah, I remember like scratching around for threats, right? Yeah, it's like, can I really like live with myself if I cut this thing? It's kind of more in the space that we're in, I think.
So we've talked about this potential blue-red, policing aggressive mana bases whilst having a streamlined mana base itself and taking advantage of a bonus point and not playing Volcanic Island, and potentially being a really, really good entry deck into the format for new players. So what about the other end of the spectrum, Dan? You've been playing like 4-color piles of, just on
growth value. Yeah. Oh, look, that does have a lot of life gain. I honestly can't see the deck functioning with those kinds of shock lands. I think probably 4 colors may be off limits, but like I'm really interested to see whether people can do it. I did see the other night someone's done an Omnath list with mainly basics. It's a rug with an Omnath in it.
Oh yeah. Just splash that little bit of.
Just splash that one white.
Do you have your current list on Moxfield that we can have a peer at?
My current list. Oh yeah, it's up there somewhere.
Yeah. Whilst you're finding it, I will just make a comment that I think this is a good thing. The fact that a rule comes out and it disproportionately assists the decks that have historically over the last 4 years onwards have seen a real issue with being able to be competitive, i.e. 2-color decks, in comparison to these 4-color stews. And we go, I don't think I can actually use this rule for this 4-color stew. That's probably a good thing. We didn't need to assist Omnath piles, but we did need to see some kind of change and hopefully now resurgence in 2-color decks.
Yeah, so I just pulled it up now. So people, I published an article recently. We've talked about it a bit on previous podcasts, but it's just like the greediest. Look, there are greedier ones. I'm not running a lot of double pips in multiple colors. Like there's no double red or anything in here. But like if you look at this mana base, like 2 basics, a whole slew of of original jewels, and a couple of shocks. Like I just think it might be hard to make this kind of pile work, but if you can, like, all the power to you.
Interestingly, like I saw Sylvan Library there. Like one of your thoughts, which you wrote about in the article, was I've got all this life gain from Omnath, Euro, Oko, all these other things, Batterskull. What am I doing with all this life other than defending against aggro? Well, I'll use Sylvan Library to get some card advantage. But a different way to go now would be, instead of using Sylvan Library, well, I'll just use Shocklands and get a bonus point.
Yep.
I think it's risky, but it's possible.
Yeah.
Could you see that? Could you see, let's just say, replacing these 6 dual lands with shock lands? That's like dramatic. This is not just some little change, but that's a dramatic change.
I'm fetching a jewel every time.
You're probably starting the game on like 12 life, right?
I am. Yeah, that's right. But then look, there's a lot of life gain in the list. I could use a Ragavan, or I could use a Gush. Actually, I like Gush over Expressive Iteration, actually. Because
the gushing shocks is painful too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to work, is it? But I mean,
yeah.
if you got to throw a Ragavan in there for an additional piece of pressure, and instead you tweaked your threats and you played Kitchen Finks, you played your Baloth or whatever in the sideboard, you played Thrag Tusk at the top end of your curve. Like maybe it's doable. I'm not going to say I want to try it, but
you could play like a 4-color life gain deck with shocks.
Yes,
and a bonus point.
I think incidental life gain is really, really underrated. I underrate it and have historically underrated it a lot. And then every time I get frustrated, I play against like Junk or something, and you got them on the ropes, and then they just kind of stabilize, and then their life total starts changing, and you're like, oh, that's this seems unfair. You just gained 3 life from that Siege Rhino. This seems unfair. You just gained 4 life from that Kitchen Finks, twice. Whilst
as soon as like Stoneforge Mystic went to 0 points, and I started playing Batterskull, like I saw the power of that life gain. That's not incidental, that's recurring, but life gain can be very good.
Yes, yeah, that's fair. And so so this is obviously one end of the spectrum, trying to convert a 4-color deck. Probably not going to work, but there are considerations. Maybe it's possible to do it. What about the other end of the spectrum? What about 2-color decks? I know, Drew, you've recently moved towards Bourbon and Coke, i.e., blue, white, X miracles. Actually going
work out
towards
an unshare here. Stop sharing. Here we go. There we go.
Yeah. Well, we could go colorless as well, but we'll go 2 colors.
Oh, okay, yeah.
To start with. Yeah, so I think once Ragavan got pointed, I wasn't getting as much out of red, and I'm writing a primer on this at the moment. So I thought, okay, well, let's have a crack with back to basics and just straight blue-white. And yeah, the card quality is so high with a few new additions like Murktide and Reality Chip and even Ledger Shredder if you want, that I didn't actually feel the loss of the red in terms of card quality. Card quality was still there. So yeah, I just went with that, and yeah, it's a very, and I was struggling at the points at the end, like because I wanted to muck around with Urza's Saga and top. I could no longer really justify Mystical Tutor, which was a long running kind of tool in the deck for balance or for entry at the Angels Swing Con. But now if I have a bonus point, all I have to do is, the only change I made was I replaced Tundra with Prairie Stream.
Okay. Yep.
Because and I was interested to find Prairie Stream because it's an island plains. You can fetch it, and it comes into play untapped if you have 2 basics in play. So this is a deck that already has lots of basics because it's got Astrolabe and Back to Basics as a plan. And so you can fetch the Prairie Stream early tapped, if you want it. It's a reactive deck, so you might not have much to do on turn 1. Or you can just fetch it untapped from turn 3 onwards. So that's not a big cost.
Not when you were like previously playing a Triome. A lot of the time your opening plan was to bring in play a tap land on the first turn.
It's very
and that felt good
now in Highlander, so this seems like a strict upgrade for that deck.
Yeah, so
you happen to have a list currently?
Or... I do, but I don't know if I should be sharing it before Masters, but we'll have a look.
All right. Yeah. But like the regaining of the Mystical Tutor, so
many things you can do.
All right. So so it just lets me play Sensei's top. Sorry, I'll go to share, don't I?
Like we talked in this, like in our podcast last time about like personal tutor versus mystical tutor, and getting the mystical tutor back for you is like massively relevant to this strategy. Like, I think that's pretty big.
So those are my points. So I didn't want to drop Lutri because I just think it's really nice card advantage. So yeah, the 7-point list was on Lutri, Gush, Balance, Mystic Sanctuary, and then it had top Urza Saga, which was a bit experimental, but it was good. And then now with a bonus point, I think it's worth. I did miss the Mystical Tutor. The balance was less reliable. You couldn't find it as readily. so now you've got Mystical Tutor, and you can keep top is effectively your bonus point. And now, and this is an interesting point. Like I'm not getting a massive power spike out of top. It's not even pointed potentially fully for power reasons. It's partly for, although it is a good card, and in this deck it can be quite good.
Yeah.
Getting intrigue, setting up intrigue on balance, and getting advantage out of balance. But yeah, like it is in the if all I have to do is drop Tundra for Prairie Stream, then I get to add top. That's a nice addition. It's a nice little boost for a 2-color deck.
I like it. I think this is a really great example of using the bonus point in a way that allows the deck to do a synergy that it just simply wasn't able to achieve at 7 points. Whereas with no reserve list, trading off that Tundra for a bonus point is really, really interesting design space. You wouldn't be able to actually assemble that configuration any other way within 7, right? You're going to have to lose a critical piece of your design.
Yeah, I'd have to lose top or loot tree.
Yeah,
and
losing loot tree to beat Urza Saga. So again, there's like about 3 or 4 or 5 different combinations that you can work within, and it's presenting you these choices and ideas. There's no strict this is strictly the correct play, which is
I don't know what the correct points are. This is just what I'm trying at the moment.
Yeah, but like the Lutri Gush Sanctuary kind of thing is a package, really, when you think about it.
Yeah,
like you're really looking to maximize Gush, and then put it back on the top, and then go again, draw 4 cards with Lutri, that kind of thing. So I think that all works together as a really neat package.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you even get these snow-covered islands and in real life?
You can't get them yet.
Oh, okay. All right.
The deck doesn't look so cool yet.
No. Can't actually buy them.
Well, interesting thing though is that you do lose Null Rod if you go for a bonus point because it's on the reserve list. But you've still got Stony Silence, you've still got Hercule's Recall, Rebuild, Serenity. You've got plenty of options. So I don't think that's a massive. I don't think artifact decks get a huge boost out of that. People playing a bit less Null Rod because now the Oof and other options are there.
Yeah, Null Rod is fundamentally kind of a sacred cow that's kind of been carried over. When there were no other alternatives, this was the one. And then progressively that has started to change, hasn't it?
Yeah. So let's go to look at artifacts now. I've got that as well.
Yeah.
So some people thought, so this is just Graham put together this list recently based on Thomas Bott's deck. Or maybe it was just Thomas Bott's a recent list, but
still get Soul Ring. Amazing.
Hey?
You still get Soul Ring, like amazing, right?
Well, yeah,
I mean, Soul Ring is just EDH All Star. This just doesn't go away.
Well, this deck always had Soul Ring at 7 points. It had Soul Ring, Mana Vault, Mishra's Workshop, Tolarian Academy, and Urza Saga. And so people are wondering, well, I haven't heard from Thomas. I expect Thomas will stay with his current points configuration because one of the initial thoughts behind the deck was to abuse Mishra's Workshop. And the depointing of Tolarian Academy from 2 down to 1 was a nice power boost.
Yeah, the Academy is important. Like it's how you play around Null Rod or like Null Rod type effects as well.
Energy flux, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the 7-point version is better personally. Oh, and there's also, however, people were thinking, well, if you can play Soul Ring and Mana Crypt.
Mana Crypt, yeah.
And then you can still play Mana Vault and Urza Saga. And that's powerful. And you could maybe change the deck a bit to make it a bit more mid-rangey. I don't know. Although it is already fairly mid-rangey. But the fact is you also lose Metalworker.
Yeah.
You also lose City of Traders.
And Grim Monolith.
Yeah.
Ooh,
yeah. These are costs.
They're real costs.
Yeah, that starts to get a lot, doesn't it? Yeah.
Nonetheless, even if the bonus point version is slightly inferior, it's still an entry point. It's still a way that people can play this deck in a competitive, viable way without shelling out thousands of dollars. Yeah,
the Mishra's Workshop is just such a huge cost financially, and only ever going to go up. But that's the thing, this is fundamentally all about choices, and the no RL bonus point rule offers choices to existing players, but fundamentally gives an avenue for new players to go, hey, I really like Thomas Bott's list. can I build it? I can't afford a Mishra's Workshop, but I can make a build that uses Urza Saga, and I have that because it's a recent printing and so on.
Mana Crypt, yeah,
you get Mana Crypt, which is very accessible due to EDH, and yeah. So I think that having choices is one of the keys here, and as much as we wax lyrical about how we can tweak our decks and so on, fundamentally for the majority of the players, it doesn't change what you do. If you own your reserve list cards, you're probably still playing your 7-point version of your deck and not eschewing those prized possessions of yours to try and play some new card to fit in a new powerful card. But it's a choice, it's a choice that people can make. Yeah, and it's
well, I think people with ACAL like to play ACAL, but they can also recognize that that's a bit of a pet choice and may not be the best, but they like it. And that's fine. It's going to be good. Yeah. But just you just look at this. This is sorted by price. So
by price. Sort by price. I didn't even realize this is a function.
Yeah, sort by price. So you look the 4 reserve list cards there, like Mishra's Workshop, Grim Monolith, City of Traders, Metalworker. They're among the most expensive cards in the deck. All the most expensive cards. And
they go from like a couple of $100 to a couple of $1,000 US.
Yeah, Metalworker's 140 US and Mishra's Workshop's 4,000 US on Mox build.
And just imagine how quickly this video will date. I every time I go back and look at videos that I've created, look at this budget deck that you can play. All you need is 1 Tiger, which is just like $90. I watch it back and I'm like, oh no, how things change in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. So I think
this list. Yeah. Sorry, keep going, Drew.
No, you go. I was just going to conclude that Artifacts is, while it's an example of while the optimal deck may be play reserve list cards, nonetheless, you could still mount a powerful deck with the bonus point, which is nice. That's increasing accessibility.
Yeah, and the thing that I'm thinking about in just looking at this list is like, there was a few years ago that like Mulch had like a mono white taxes artifact deck that like, I think it had Mox Pearl in it, but you could conceivably run like Soul Ring and Mana Crypt. And like Caracas or Strip Mine, like things like that. And like this is a blisteringly fast aggro deck, like really, when you play against it. Whereas that one was really looking to prey on the blue decks by like slowing down their cantripping and that kind of thing. So, but there might be like a variant, you might be able to buy an extra point for one of those like white taxes, aggro taxes kind of lists. And I think Mulch came second at Nationals, like maybe 2017 or something.
Yes.
With a deck like that. And I don't know, I was wondering if there's design space.
I think Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Urza Saga, and one other point, Wasteland or Mana Vault or whatever, or Caracas. There's heaps of good decks you could build that. You can do like medium red or medium white or like kind of a white aggro artifact deck. Yeah, that's a big design space.
Yeah, that could become the the budget suite. You got the budget suite of these colorless cards that can become big red, white taxes, colorless or colorless X aggro and mid range.
Yeah, because if you look at once you take up the offer of the bonus point, you start what are the most powerful cards I can use then? And Soul Ring and Mana Crypt are among them because you can't use ACAL, Time Walk, Moxen, but Soul Ring and Mana Crypt are up there. And they're available on the bonus point. Yeah, so that's a good option. Yeah.
I don't know about you guys, but whenever I see someone play turn 1 Mana Crypt, I just think I'm dead.
You have to assume you've lost.
If you haven't got the force negation, you're stuffed.
Yeah, it always, maybe they won't play anything off it. Maybe they'll take enough damage to die. No, it's never the case.
Not gonna happen. Yeah,
they occasionally die, but yeah, they should win. Yeah. What other things can we talk about? Is there?
Well, I'll share my screen if you stop yours. Okay, let's see. Let's share this. So, looking at kind of building in this design space, let's see. I'll go through all my decks. New stuff. So you were talking about. Let's do this one. You were talking about blue white. This is exactly the same as what you're talking about, blue white, but you can build it differently. I might just move.
Yeah, mine's a bit
change the stacks.
This is a bigger control deck. Yeah.
This is something that has not existed in Highlander, and I mean it exists, but it's not good, right? But it has not existed in Highlander at a competitive level for ages. It's like blue-white control, a proper control, and this is one of the cards that just really impressed me playing it on Arena, as exactly what you're doing, Entreat the Angels. So I'm like, oh, where can I play that? Well, blue-white control. And if you're on a low creature count, you can leverage main deck Wraths. You can main deck this Sunset Revelry. You've got synergies here with Planeswalkers. And the main reason that this is a viable archetype is Sol Ring. I have tried building pure control decks without Sol Ring, and they're always just feel like they're lacking something. And you're often so far on the back foot that as you've observed many times, Drew, it's all about regaining that tempo that you lose, right, from being reactive. And Portable Hole and so on. Yep, you can trade a 1 into a 2. You know, you can get that Renin 6 with your Portable Hole. But if you're reactive and you're always marching for the maximum mana cost, you're always losing mana across every exchange that you make. So trying to fill the deck with as many of these types of cards here that allow us to, 1, stabilize, and 2, trade up on mana, so that later on in the game you can regain that card disadvantage later, is good. But the main thing here is that Sol Ring, what do you want to do with control? If you go, the ideals for this deck is that you draw Sol Ring. Great. If you draw Sol Ring, you feel like a god. Like turn 1 Sol Ring, turn 2 Planeswalker. Or turn 1 Sol Ring, and then foretell this.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful. And then you're ready to cast it with the Sol Ring mana at a later point in the game, and it doesn't get thought seized, it just sits there for later on. Mana draining.
Mentor. Well. Yeah, turn to a mentor with Spell Pierce backup seems pretty good to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, perfect example. Yeah. And then you've got the big payoffs. You know, Sol Ring into Back to Basics, Sol Ring into Court of Grace, Sol Ring into hard cast Shark Typhoons. These are just all great. And the main thing here is, in terms of the points, we lose Tundra, but we get an additional basic land, which you're perfectly fine with because you're a Back to Basics deck. And you get to play all of these cards. And the key here is that you can fit in that 7th point. You know, when you're trying to think of which of these 7th points will I do? Will it be Caracas? Will it be Urza Saga? You can play all of them. And Caracas is just so good, such an underrated, it used to be such an underrated card. It's really rated properly now. But Urza Saga in this, I'm a convert ever since seeing Drew play Urza Saga in, Miracles. When it's in Bourbon and Coke, I'm like, oh yeah, sure, that's just like a free point. Okay, you're doing your thing. And then you're like, wow, this is a strong 1-point card in not even the deck that it was pointed for. It was pointed for for the Workshops decks, and the fact that it could be a bit of a free roll in other decks as well. But the main thing was the Workshops decks. And now you can just consistently have access to your Sol Ring, and you go, well, unlike Workshops, well, maybe not unlike Workshops, but basically I talked about Sol Ring turn 1. This kind of deck is a Sol Ring turn 1 or Sol Ring turn 7, always good. That's the main thing. You turn your Urza Saga into a Sol Ring, and then later on play Hardcast Shark Typhoon and immediately cast a non-creature spell afterwards, like Back to Basics. And it's huge. So this is kind of where I see control, hard control at, which is using Sol Ring and trying to be no reserved list. That's kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, I think Sol Ring is a brilliant card, but you just have to be ready to play your whole game without it.
Yes.
So you don't bank on it. Don't distort your curve. Same with Mana Crypt. Don't just build your whole curve around having turn 1 Sol Ring or Mana Crypt. But get it, draw it as a bonus, or have some light tutoring like Urza Saga to get it in the mid to late game, where you can reliably use that extra mana to turn the corner. Once you've you kind of survive, and then your Soul Ring helps you kind of move into the aggressive posture.
Exactly right. And I
yeah.
was thinking about that when I'm building these. And initially I started trying to, if Soul Ring's in my opening hand, what do I want to do? And it's like, yeah, lots of these 4 drops that just, dominate the game or change the landscape of the game. And it would just sucked. It was so bad. And so now I tend to look at how many big payoffs and mana sinks do you need for Soul Ring to be good when you draw it in the late game or you Urza Saga into it in the late game. And for me, it's 1, 2, these 2 big, and sometimes this, but mainly these 2 here. And then these 2 here, the Memory Deluge and Mystic Confluence. Occasionally a Wrath when you need to, occasionally Foretelling when you need to, and occasionally playing something that normally has an alternative mana cost. And
that's
then,
where it's at.
Yeah, so it's like half a dozen cards at the end of the day, but all you need to do is cast one of those half dozen cards with a counterspell backup, and you feel like it did its work, and then it sticks around, and later on you cast a Starnheim Unleashed, and it's huge. The one thing I will mention is Hall of the Storm Giants is beautiful. This is like Soul Ring powers this out really, really well. And I think, like, you'll notice there's no Celestial Colonnade in here. And I've been off Celestial Colonnade for a long time, and I've been off Creature Lands for a long time. But this one's coming back into my Highlander vocabulary. Hall of the Storm Giants is very, very good. The ward is just amazing. So yeah, Soul Ring will always have something that it can do.
Yeah, I think that variable mana cost point is really important. Like, I know that when I was sort of designing my deck, once I came to the resolution that if you've got some sort of big mana option in your deck, if the cards that have variable mana cost, like Bonecrusher Giant or like Shark Typhoon, like they're very, very valuable. If you have like one big mana sink in your deck, but you don't really want to be stuck with those big spells in your hand in the early game. So people should be on the lookout for those.
Yeah, Memory Deluge is another good one.
Yeah, this is a nice sink later on, which is good.
I like Retrofit a Foundry as a mana sink, just as a footnote. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
I think the last thing we'll touch on, since we've only got about 5 minutes or so before we need to wrap up, is this is a good example of a deck that kind of can't exist at what is it? Like essentially at 7 points. It just didn't want to load for a while there. I'm not sure why. So this configuration of points is one that no matter which way about it, you will make a loss if you try to build this deck at 7 points. So at 7 points, you're either going to have to cut Skull Clamp, which means you cannot grind and convert your small creatures into something valuable later, or you have to cut Gifts Ungiven, which means you cannot fast combo when your fair game doesn't actually work. In short, it's a mid-range deck that has Thassa's Oracle in it as the ability to combo when your fair game doesn't work out. And you can always cast, because of this, you can cast your Gifts Ungiven, you can get your Demonic Consultation, your Snapcaster Mage, your Thassa's Oracle, and then your Reanimate. The reason I chose Reanimate here over Unearth is because, well, you are actually a mid-range deck. You happen to combo out with it, but you are a mid-range deck, and Reanimate serves mid-range so well, as opposed to unearthing a Tarmogoyf. You can reanimate a very powerful top-end creature as long as the life cost is something you can mitigate, and that's why you got things like Kitchen Finks and sideboard cards like Thrag Tusk and the like. So
Reanimate gets better with Grief and Solitude and things like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Like while we're on that, like we haven't talked much about combo today, but I think like the loss of LED is pretty big. But I know there's like an old list, or that was not that old, running it like a blue-black Doomsday Thoracle Reanimator list. And I reckon there's some interesting design to be done there. There's some questions about whether or not it can run without Lion's Eye Diamond, but apart from that, the only other reserve list card in that list I seem to recall, was Underground Sea, right?
Yeah.
And so you can do this, you know, you play Reanimate, you can play, Thassa's Oracle, Tainted Pact, and potentially get yourself, I think, some additional protection in Force of Will, if you want to run that kind of thing. So there might be some interesting things to be done in combo as well. But that was the obvious sort of 2-color combo deck that jumped out at me when I was flicking through lists last night.
And what about and Reanimator as well? Does that help? I don't know.
It's mainly a blue-black. It's a blue-black sort of base deck. So
yeah,
like why not? What do you lose Oath? You can't play Oath probably because you want to have a
Oath
pretty
is
narrow
not on the reserve list.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, like just start playing blue-black with it's like
oh right.
You want to stay two colors. Yeah, it's hard to play. You can't play Oath, obviously. But yeah.
So Sarv, how did you manage the 3 colors in Potical in the bug mid-range combo?
Yeah, so I think it's a distinct cost. It's we've been talking about trying to go one or the other, either 2 colors or try 4 colors, lots of shock lands, and then life gain. It's not an irrelevant cost. I rejigged this mana base many times to try and make it actually work, and I ended up landing on a filter land specifically for black, green, green. Because your primary game plan is to be mid-range, you need to leverage your black, green, green. Blue, I tried the other filter lands, but blue to try and Thassa's Oracle combo. Generally, if you're comboing, then it's an emergency scenario, or it's an easy win. Okay, I'm gonna do this. That's undefended against another mid-range deck or whatever it might be. In those scenarios, that's like the 2 ends of the spectrum. It's not the middle of the spectrum. It's very, very, very likely to win, or so unfavored that you have to go for it. I'd rather be able to enact my primary game plan, which is mid-range. So that's why I have a filter land. Also of the same colors, I have a fast land, mainly because this leverages your turn 1 Mana Dork and your turn 1 Inquisition of Kozilek type effect. And those are the 2, criticals that you need. Once I did my math on these, I needed obviously the Horizon lands are really, really important here because they're always untapped. They're always a good source of both of those mana, kind of like dual lands in a way. But I then needed 1 blue-black land to balance out all of the mana numbers. And so I ended up landing on Creeping Tar Pit. I'm not sure about this. It could be that you might want a fast land or a filter land there as well. But I thought that the deck can afford 1 tapped source. And if it's over Zagoth Triad, it can afford 1 tap source. But if it's a tapped source and it's a tapped source of green, it's completely opposed to the nature of the deck. So if it's a tapped source and that tapped source is blue-black, they're the colors you need later on, so it's okay. So I'm not sold on this yet. I'm not sure. But
I'll just zoom out a bit, make an observation. Like people like thinking hard about their mana base is a really good thing. And that's because the mana base in Highlander has for many years just been a little bit formulaic. I mean, careful deck designers will still pay close attention, but this accessibility rule now encourages people to really think hard about their mana base and what they're getting out of it. I think the fact that you're turning to cards like Twilight Mire, for instance, Blooming Marsh, that increases deck diversity, which is a good thing in Highlander. And also the fact that if people are playing more 2-color decks, they're going to have to scrape a little bit to find those last few cards within their 2 colors, potentially, which also increases deck diversity. And it makes Highlander, again, a format where you can play the occasional marginal playable, you know what I mean, because it fits your deck. And that's part of the fun of Highlander for many people, myself included, is being able to play these cards that are too bad in other formats alongside cards that are incredible like Black Lotus.
Yeah. And it's likely that those cards this rule might be supplemented by cards like Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, and Urborg. It's possible that something like this that might need to go in there to balance out numbers and the like. So these are all critical decisions, and that's a really good thing that you've tapped into.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Cool. It's probably a good note to wrap up on.
Yeah, that is a good note to wrap up on. A nice positive note to think about what is deck building going to look like. I know that in short, it's going to be decisions, more decisions, and in the and more the decisions is better than fewer decisions. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on this journey through our deck building chat. At the end of the day, any lists that you see here are constantly in flux. We'll link some as needed in the video. So you can go and check them out, but note that they are in flux. We're literally puzzling our way through as we think about what we might do. The committee themselves, we had brewed many decks, and there were even pilot events and the like to see what people might build with a bonus point for no RL. And the results of them were really, really interesting too. So we've been thinking about it for a while, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. It's still lots of interesting.
It's not solved by any means.
Yeah, it's not solved, and the evidence will have to bear out at some point. You can only theory craft for so long, and then you have to just suck it and see, and we'll discover what will happen in the coming year. It's something that will be reevaluated over the course of the next year.
Yep. It's hard to run controlled trials on policy.
Yeah. I feel like that's the tagline of this.
Yeah.
Story of my life. Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thank you especially to Drew Carter and Dan Abraham.
Good on you. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Drew.